The grand stone structure of the convent loomed majestically on the highest point of the hill, offering a panoramic view of the quaint little town below. Its high walls and pointed spires exuded an air of seclusion and reverence befitting the nuns who lived and worked within its halls. However, as the sun set on the peaceful community, a sense of unease began to permeate the atmosphere. The well-manicured gardens that surrounded the convent, once a source of serenity for the nuns, now seemed to hold a sinister secret. The once cheerful songs of the birds had been replaced by an eerie silence, as if they, too, were aware of the darkness that had taken root within the walls of the holy sanctuary. The once peaceful atmosphere of the convent had been tainted by an unseen force, casting a shadow over the nuns' daily routines and unsettling the holy sanctuary's very foundation. The once harmonious community had been torn asunder by the evil force that seemed to be stalking the halls of the convent. The nuns, who had dedicated their lives to prayer and service, now found themselves plagued by a dark foreboding. They whispered of strange occurrences and unsettling dreams, and many began to fear for their safety. As each day passed, the darkness grew stronger and gripped harder, threatening to consume all that was good and pure within the convent. The nuns' faith was tested. They knew they must act fast to rid the sanctuary of this evil presence before it was too late. The first indication that something was amiss within the convent began in the form of eerie noises that echoed through the halls at night. As the nuns retired to their rooms, they were accompanied by a symphony of strange and unsettling sounds. Some claimed to hear chanting as if a ghostly choir were rehearsing in the distance. Others reported hearing the sound of footsteps approaching, only to find the corridor empty when they investigated. At first, the nuns dismissed these occurrences as the product of overactive imaginations and fatigue. However, as the nights passed and the noises persisted, it became clear that something more sinister was at play. A sense of unease had replaced the once peaceful atmosphere of the convent, and the nuns could not shake the feeling that they were not alone. As the peculiar events persisted, rumors of discomfort and apprehension started circulating among the community residents. The nuns, who had devoted their lives to religious devotion and selflessness, began to experience feelings of fear and doubt. The strange happenings, such as unexplainable noises, objects moving on their own, and Sister Mary Margaret's possession, caused them to question their beliefs and the safety of their surroundings, leading to a sense of unease and uncertainty among the nuns, who were not used to dealing with such terrifying events. A sense of dread and anxiety had replaced the peaceful and serene atmosphere of the convent. The nuns were frightened and knew they had to do something to stop this evil that had infiltrated their home. They had grown comfortable living a life of service and humility, but now they found themselves fighting for their own survival. They tried to keep their faith and trust in God, but it was difficult to do while facing such inexplicable and terrifying occurrences. They couldn't help but feel vulnerable and exposed. The nuns were in a state of confusion and turmoil as they struggled to understand the strange occurrences within the convent. They questioned their faith and wondered if they had somehow angered the divine. They couldn't understand why such terrible things were happening within the sacred walls of the convent. They would hear strange noises in the middle of the night, objects would move on their own, and they even witnessed Sister Mary Margaret's possession. These events led them to question everything they knew and believed. Despite their fears, the nuns didn't give up hope. They knew they had to take action at once to stop the evil that had infiltrated their home before it consumed the convent entirely. They searched for answers and tried to find the source of the strange noises and the cause of Sister Mary Margaret's possession. They spent hours in prayer, seeking guidance from God and asking for the strength to face the challenges ahead. The nuns were determined to end the strange occurrences and restore the peace and serenity they had grown accustomed to. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they were willing to do whatever it took to protect their home and community. They knew it would be a test of their faith, and they were ready to face it. They searched for answers, they tried to understand the events that were happening around them, and they did not hesitate to call for help when they needed it. They were determined to overcome the challenges that came their way and to restore the peace and safety of the convent. It was with Sister Mary Margaret's possession that the nuns fully understood the gravity of the situation. Sister Mary Margaret was a beloved member of the convent, known for her kindness, compassion and gentle nature. Her peers respected her well, and she had always been a shining example of devotion and piety. But one day, her behavior changed, drastically and alarmingly. Her once sweet demeanor turned sour, and she began to display signs of rage and violence. She would lash out at the other nuns while her speech filled with profanity and obscenities that were not in her character. She would also have sudden outbursts of screams and would seem to be in a trance-like state. It was clear that something was terribly wrong with Sister Mary Margaret. The nuns were shocked and confused by Sister Mary Margaret's sudden change in behavior. They couldn't understand what had caused her to act in such a manner, and they were deeply concerned for her well-being. Once a devout and gentle nun, Sister Mary Margaret exhibited strange and terrifying behavior. She would speak in tongues, her voice taking on a guttural and unnatural tone. Her eyes would roll back in her head, and she would convulse as if possessed by some evil force. The other nuns, deeply troubled by Sister Mary Margaret's condition, tried to intervene. They gathered in the chapel to pray for her deliverance, begging for the malevolent force to be exorcised from her body. But despite their earnest efforts, their prayers seemed to go unanswered. Sister Mary Margaret only grew more aggressive and volatile, lashing out at anyone who came near her. The community of nuns that had once been a source of comfort and support had become a place of fear and uncertainty. The nuns felt torn between their love and concern for Sister Mary Margaret, and the overwhelming sense of dread that her possession brought to the convent. Sister Mary Margaret was a beloved community member, and it was heart-wrenching for the nuns to see her in such a state. They couldn't understand what the demon could want from her, and they were deeply concerned for her well-being. A sense of unease now plagued the once peaceful and harmonious community, and the sisters were unsure how to proceed. They were afraid to speak of the events happening in the convent as they didn't want to disturb the faith of their fellow sisters. They knew they had to take action to protect themselves and their fellow sisters, but they didn't know where to start. They were facing an unknown and terrifying threat and didn't know how to deal with it. As Sister Mary Margaret's condition worsened, it became clear that they would need to take action to protect themselves and their fellow sisters. They knew they had to act quickly and call for an exorcist to perform the rite of exorcism. They hoped this would help free Sister Mary Margaret from the evil force that had taken hold of her body. They knew that it was a test of their faith and that they had to rely on their trust in God to overcome the challenges that came their way. One evening, while the nuns were engaged in evening prayers at the chapel, Sister Mary Margaret unexpectedly burst into the room. Her eyes were wide open and seemed to be shining with an unearthly light. She opened her mouth, letting out a piercing scream, and began thrashing wildly, causing panic and disarray among the other nuns. Her behavior was completely erratic, and the other nuns could not understand what had caused her to act in such a manner. They were frightened and confused as they tried to make sense of the situation. Sister Mary Margaret continued to scream and flail, her movements becoming increasingly fierce, until, without warning, she collapsed to the floor, her body going limp, and her screams coming to an abrupt stop. The other nuns rushed to her side, but she was unresponsive, and they could not tell if she was alive or dead. It was a scene of complete confusion, fear and uncertainty among the nuns, who had never experienced anything like this. The convent's nuns lived in a state of fear and terror. One of their own, Sister Mary Margaret, had been possessed by an evil entity, and strange and terrifying events had been happening in the convent. They knew they had to act quickly, so they called for an exorcist to perform the rite of exorcism to drive the demon out of Sister Mary Margaret's body. Father John sent a priest to the convent to perform the exorcism. When he arrived, he was greeted by visibly shaken and anxious nuns. They told him about the strange and terrifying events that had been happening in the convent and how Sister Mary Margaret had been behaving in an unusual manner. Some nuns were even too afraid to speak about it and were crying. Father John could feel the eerie and tense atmosphere in the convent. Father John arrived at the convent with a sense of determination and purpose. He had called to perform an exorcism on Sister Mary Margaret, who an evil entity had possessed. As he met with the nuns and heard their accounts of the strange and terrifying events that had been happening in the convent, he knew that this was going to be no ordinary possession. Father John, a seasoned exorcist, began the ritual by preparing the chapel with sacred objects and symbols, such as holy water and religious artifacts. He then recited powerful prayers and chanted, invoking the power of God to drive out the demon. Father John immediately felt the presence of a powerful and evil force. The entity that had taken over Sister Mary Margaret was powerful and fought back with all its might. The exorcism was a fierce and intense battle, with the demon using all its strength and guile to resist Father John's every move. As the exorcism progressed, Sister Mary Margaret's body contorted with pain, and her voice altered as the demon struggled to maintain control. The room filled with an eerie silence, only broken by the sounds of Father John's chants, and the demon's growls. The other nuns watched in horror as Father John struggled against the evil force, their hearts filled with fear and uncertainty. They could see the strain on Father John's face as he fought to expel the demon from Sister Mary Margaret's body, his voice growing louder and more forceful as he recited the prayers. Despite the demon's resistance, Father John remained determined and focused, using all his knowledge and skill to weaken the demon's hold on Sister Mary Margaret. The exorcism was a long and arduous process that lasted for several hours. As the ritual progressed, Sister Mary Margaret began showing signs of distress. Her body weakened, as did her will. The other nuns watched in horror as Father John struggled against the evil force, their hearts filled with fear and uncertainty. They could see the strain on Father John's face as he fought to expel the demon from Sister Mary Margaret's body, his voice growing louder and more forceful as he recited the prayers. The exorcism was a fierce and intense struggle, with the demon resisting Father John's every move. The demon fought back with all its might, trying to overpower Father John and take control of Sister Mary Margaret's body. But Father John was determined. He used all his strength and will to push the demon out of Sister Mary Margaret's body. He recited prayers and incantations, making use of all the religious artifacts at his disposal, such as the holy water and the crucifix, to weaken the demon's hold on Sister Mary Margaret. After what seemed like an eternity, Father John emerged victorious. Finally, casting the demon out, Sister Mary Margaret was restored to her former self. The nuns were overjoyed and thanked the Father for all his help in their time of need. They knew they would not have gotten through this trying time without him. Sister Mary Margaret was understandably shaken, but grateful to be free from the demon's grasp. Father John bestowed blessings upon the sisters, signifying the successful completion of the exorcism. A serene atmosphere filled the chapel, allowing the nuns to resume their daily activities with the assurance that the evil force that had plagued their home had finally been vanquished. But the nuns knew that their troubles were far from over. They had heard whispers of other possessions, of other nuns being overcome by the same malevolent force. And they knew they had to do something to stop it before it was too late. The nuns gathered in the chapel, praying for guidance and protection. And as they prayed, a plan began to take shape. They would go on a pilgrimage, traveling to the Holy Land to seek out the source of the evil that had taken hold of their convent. They would seek out holy relics and artifacts, using them to banish the demon once and for all. The nuns set out on their journey, determined to put an end to the evil that had infiltrated their home. They braved treacherous mountains and deserts, facing countless dangers along the way. But as they journeyed deeper into the unknown, they began to feel a sense of unease and dread creeping over them. They knew that they were getting closer to the source of the evil and that their mission was becoming more dangerous with each step they took. Despite the increasing danger, they pressed on, driven by their sense of duty and a burning desire to rid their home of the evil force that had taken hold of it. They gathered relics and artifacts, seeking the power they needed to banish the demon from their convent permanently. Finally, they reached the Holy Land, and with the help of the relics and artifacts they had gathered, they could summon the demon and engage it in a fierce battle. The nuns fought with all their might, but the demon was powerful and relentless. In the end, they banished the demon back to the pits of hell through a final act of sacrifice. When the nuns returned home, they felt a sense of accomplishment and triumph, but also felt drained from the intense experience they had just been through. Despite their exhaustion, they could not help but feel a sense of pride in their ability to persevere and succeed. They knew they had just faced a trial by fire, where they were tested to their limits but ultimately overcame and emerged victorious. But as they took their place in the chapel, they realized that the demon had left a permanent mark on them. It had taken them over, and the exorcism had not been enough. They were different, Their eyes were empty, and a sense of unease and evil emanated. They realized that they had not truly banished the demon, and it was still with them in the body of the nuns. They knew they were doomed to spend the rest of their days as vessels of evil, spreading its malevolent influence to all around them, unable ever to be free of its grasp. What could it possibly have in store for them?